1976 was a strange year for horror. The gothic chills of the early 70s were fading, and the raw experimentation of the decade was beginning to turn darker, meaner, and more personal. It was a time when filmmakers weren't chasing trends, they were testing limits. Some turned to folklore and the occult, others to science gone wrong, and some just wanted to push audiences as far as they could go. This was a year where horror lived in the margins, in small towns, isolated houses, and feverish imaginations. It was the rise of folk horror in America, the last breath of Hammer's gothic nightmares, and the explosion of exploitation cinema in grindhouses across the world. Every movie felt dangerous in its own way, a mix of art, madness, and raw ambition. So grab that dusty tape, dim the lights, and step back into 1976, a year when horror stopped playing nice and started staring straight into the abyss. Massacre at Central High, 1976. High school becomes a war zone in this sharp, subversive cult thriller that turns teenage angst into political allegory. When a new student transfers to Central High, he finds a campus ruled by a trio of bullies who control the halls through intimidation. But when he finally strikes back, the social order collapses. And what replaces it is even more disturbing. Part revenge film, part moral fable, Massacre at Central High takes the familiar teen drama and twists it into something brutal and intelligent. Director Renee Daalder strips away adult authority entirely, leaving the students to form their own twisted hierarchy. What starts as rebellion quickly turns into a study of corruption and the cycle of power, a clever reflection of how easily victims can become oppressors. The film's low-budget production only enhances its stark, almost dreamlike tone. There's no music blasting or flashy editing, just quiet tension, empty hallways, and an atmosphere of inevitable collapse. It's the kind of movie that snuck into midnight programming and stuck with anyone who stumbled across it. Long before Heathers or Battle Royale, this film was already exploring how peer pressure and revenge can curdle into something apocalyptic. Massacre at Central High might wear the look of a simple exploitation flick, but beneath the surface, it's one of the most cynical and thought-provoking teen horror stories of its era. Who Can Kill a Child? 1976. A quiet vacation turns into something unspeakable in this deeply unsettling Spanish horror gem. A British couple travels to a remote island off the coast of Spain, searching for sun and peace before the arrival of their third child. But what greets them isn't paradise. It's a town frozen in silence. The shops are empty, the doors stand open, and the only inhabitants left are the children, smiling with an eerie calm that grows more sinister by the minute. Director Narciso Ibáñez Serrador transforms the idyllic setting into something nightmarish, using bright sunlight and open spaces to heighten the unease. There's no darkness to hide in here. Every scene feels exposed, and that's what makes it terrifying. The horror builds slowly, more psychological than visceral, as the couple realizes the true nature of the island's nightmare. It's a story about guilt, human cruelty, and the terrifying idea that innocence can become its own form of violence. Few films from the 1970s feel this morally charged or confident in tone. Serrador weaves tension like a documentary of decay, capturing something primal and unforgettable. Long after it ends, the question in its title continues to echo. Not as a challenge, but as a haunting reminder of what people become when reason gives way to fear. The Food of the Gods, 1976. Nature fights back in this gloriously chaotic slice of 1970s eco-horror, where science meddles with evolution and pays the price. Deep in the wilderness of British Columbia, a mysterious milky substance bubbles up from the earth. When animals feed on it, they grow. Not just large, but monstrously oversized. Soon, rats the size of wolves and wasps with wingspans like eagles are turning the quiet countryside into a war zone. Loosely inspired by H.G. Wells's novel, The Food of the Gods delivers everything one could hope for from drive-in creature cinema: miniature sets, rubbery effects, and sheer enthusiasm. Director Burt I. Gordon, known to fans as Mr. Big, stages the chaos with endearing earnestness, filling every frame with practical ingenuity and old-fashioned spectacle. The giant animal attacks may look dated now, but their handmade quality gives the film a strange, enduring charm. Marjoe Gortner leads the cast with straight-faced seriousness that only makes the madness more entertaining. What makes the movie fun is its total lack of cynicism. It believes in its premise completely. Behind the pulpy thrills, there's even a faint ecological warning, a sense that nature's revenge might be well earned. It's messy, loud, and completely unrestrained, the kind of film that defined weekend rentals and late-night marathons. The Food of the Gods may not be elegant, but it's a perfect time capsule of 1970s creature feature excess, where every swarm, squeal, and explosion feels like the end of the world. The House with Laughing Windows, 1976. In a small Italian village surrounded by swamps and silence, a restorer is hired to uncover a church fresco painted by a long-dead artist known for disturbing imagery. As he begins his work, whispers spread through the town, stories of madness, murder, and the painter's obsession with capturing real suffering. The further he digs into the art, the more he realizes that the horror behind it never truly ended. Pupi Avati's The House with Laughing Windows is one of the great slow-burn mysteries of Italian horror, a film steeped in dread rather than spectacle. Instead of Giallo-style excess or flashy violence, it builds unease through atmosphere. Decaying buildings, strange villagers, and the constant hum of something unseen. The beauty of the Italian countryside becomes a trap, its warmth concealing rot beneath the surface. Avati directs with painterly precision, blending mystery, folklore, and psychological terror into a seamless whole. Every clue feels cursed, every smile conceals something sinister. By the time the truth is revealed, the viewer feels as trapped as the protagonist. Surrounded by darkness, hiding in plain sight. Unearthed by horror fans decades later, The House with Laughing Windows has earned its place as a masterpiece of mood and suggestion. Proof that true fear doesn't need spectacle, only silence and time to take root. Squirm, 1976. When a brutal storm knocks down power lines in the backwoods of Georgia, something sinister awakens beneath the mud. Thousands of electrified worms rise to the surface, swarming through homes, trees, and bodies, with an appetite that can't be stopped. At first, it's just a strange local curiosity, until the ground itself begins to move. Director Jeff Lieberman brings a raw, grimy authenticity to this creature feature, grounding its absurd premise with an eerie southern atmosphere. The rural setting feels sticky and claustrophobic, and the cast of small-town characters, from the visiting outsider to the suspicious locals, gives the story a lived-in realism. What sets Squirm apart from other nature-gone-wild horror of the era is its texture, the sound of rainfall against tin roofs, the close-ups of writhing movement, the sense that nature itself is reclaiming what humanity has spoiled. While some moments veer toward camp, the film's handmade effects and creeping dread create an unease that's hard to shake. It's the kind of movie that would have played late on a Friday night, something you stumble onto halfway through, unable to look away, even as the horror gets stranger by the minute. Dirty, loud, and crawling with energy, Squirm is pure 1970s drive-in mayhem. The kind that sticks to your skin long after the credits roll. Dark August, 1976. A quiet Vermont town becomes the stage for paranoia and witchcraft in this overlooked American folk horror gem. After accidentally killing a young girl in a car accident, a man retreats to the countryside to escape the guilt. But peace never comes. Strange figures appear in the woods, animals react to something unseen, and whispers suggest that the girl's grandfather, a local hermit, has cursed him. What begins as grief and isolation slowly transforms into supernatural terror. Dark August thrives on atmosphere rather than spectacle. The rural landscapes, captured in washed-out tones, feel alive with something hidden just beyond sight. Director Martin Goldman keeps the pacing deliberate, allowing each uneasy moment to build upon the last. There's no grand revelation or chaotic climax, just a steady tightening of dread as reality and superstition intertwine. The performances have a naturalistic quality that makes the film's descent into occult fear all the more convincing. J. Barrie's portrayal of a man unraveling under unseen forces is quietly desperate, while Kim Hunter brings a grounding presence as a local psychic who might be his only hope. Though it never gained the recognition of its British folk horror counterparts, Dark August captures the same haunting stillness. The sense that nature itself has turned judgmental. It's a slow, eerie dream of guilt and punishment, the kind of film that lingers like smoke long after the credits fade. Blood-Sucking Freaks, 1976. In the smoky back alleys of New York's underground theater scene, a demented stage director puts on performances that blur the line between illusion and atrocity. To the shocked patrons, it looks like extreme art, a grotesque display of pain and spectacle. But behind the curtains, the show is terrifyingly real. Also known as Sardu Master of the Screaming Virgins and The Incredible Torture Show, Blood-Sucking Freaks is one of the most infamous exploitation films of the 1970s, a collision of sadistic humor and underground grit that still manages to shock decades later. Directed by Joel M. Reed, it's less a traditional horror story and more a descent into the sleaziest corners of grindhouse cinema, where morality doesn't exist and the audience itself becomes complicit. It's a movie designed to provoke, and it does so with a grimy, unapologetic tone that could only have come from the heyday of Times Square's exploitation theaters. The low-budget production only adds to its impact. Every flicker of bad lighting and scratch of film grain feels like part of the experience. It's the kind of movie whispered about among collectors and banned lists, something that survived on bootlegs and late-night rentals, infamous for good reason. Not for the faint of heart, Blood-Sucking Freaks stands as a wild time capsule of 1970s transgression, a reminder of when horror pushed boundaries not for prestige, but for pure shock value. It's grotesque, absurd, and unforgettable in ways only that era could deliver. Death Weekend, 1976. A quiet weekend retreat turns savage in this tense and grim piece of Canadian horror. A wealthy dentist and his sharp-witted girlfriend drive to a secluded lakeside home for a getaway, but a group of reckless men follows them there after a road altercation. What begins as taunting quickly erupts into violence, trapping the couple in a nightmare of survival as civility crumbles, and revenge becomes the only language left. Directed by William Fruit and produced by Ivan Reitman before his comedy fame, Death Weekend, also released as The House by the Lake, is raw and unnerving, less about gore and more about the steady, escalating cruelty people are capable of when rules disappear. Brenda Vaccaro gives a commanding performance as the woman forced to fight back. Not a screaming victim, but someone pushed to her limits and beyond. The isolated setting, the eerily quiet lake, and the emptiness of the surrounding woods all combine into a suffocating atmosphere of dread. What separates this from the exploitation crowd is its restraint. Fruet doesn't glorify the violence. He lets it hang in the air, making every scream and sound of breaking glass feel earned. The result is a revenge story that's cold, uncomfortable, and far more human than it first appears. Death Weekend may not be widely remembered, but for those who saw it on late-night TV or stumbled across the tape years later, it remains one of Canada's most brutal and overlooked thrillers. Embryo, 1976. Science meets moral collapse in this cerebral slice of 1970s sci-fi horror. A brilliant geneticist, played by Hudson, becomes obsessed with unlocking the secrets of accelerated human growth. His experiments begin with animals, but when he successfully grows a human embryo into an adult woman in a matter of weeks, his fascination turns to obsession, and the lines between creation, control, and conscience begin to blur. Embryo unfolds like a cautionary parable about ambition gone too far. Director Ralph Nelson treats the subject with a cold precision, more medical thriller than monster movie. Yet the unease builds quietly under every sterile lab light. Barbara Carrera brings a haunting mix of vulnerability and intelligence to the role of the rapidly maturing woman, creating a tragic counterpoint to Hudson's performance as a man seduced by his own intellect. While its pacing feels methodical, the film's ideas linger, questioning not only the ethics of science, but the fragility of empathy itself. It's part Frankenstein, part Twilight Zone, and entirely of its era, reflecting the growing anxiety over technological advancement and the loss of human restraint. For audiences who discovered it through faded rentals or late-night broadcasts, Embryo stood out as something different, a slow, unsettling experiment in psychological horror that leaves its biggest questions deliberately unanswered. To the Devil a Daughter, 1976. In the waning days of Hammer's horror reign, this dark and atmospheric tale arrived like a final incantation. Based on the novel by Dennis Wheatley, the story follows an excommunicated priest who raises a young girl for sinister purposes, a vessel meant to bring something unspeakable into the world. When an American occult author uncovers the plan, a desperate struggle between faith and darkness begins. Hammer Films had built its legacy on Gothic castles and Victorian monsters, but To the Devil a Daughter shifts the terror into modern times, neon-lit London streets and sunlit exteriors replacing fog and candlelight. Christopher Lee is chilling as the fallen priest, his calm voice concealing pure devotion to evil, while a young Nastasia Kinski gives the film a haunting innocence that makes every scene more unsettling. Director Peter Sykes blends occult mystery with psychological tension, leaning into the paranoia and moral decay of the 1970s. The result is an eerie, elegant descent into corruption and faith, tested to its breaking point. It's a slow burn filled with religious dread and quiet menace, not Hammer's loudest scream, but one of its most mature and unnerving. Released just as the studio's Gothic empire was crumbling, To the Devil a Daughter feels like the last gasp of a dying era, a sophisticated, sinister curtain call that left audiences wondering what new horrors the next decade would bring. Looking back, 1976 feels like the calm before the storm, the moment right before horror blew wide open. The slasher craze was just around the corner. But here, the fear still felt intimate and strange. From the backroads of rural America to haunted corners of Europe, these films captured a world losing its balance, one story at a time. They weren't polished or safe, but they were fearless. Whether it was science tampering with life, revenge born out of cruelty, or innocence turned to terror, 1976 proved that horror didn't need big budgets or studio gloss to get under your skin. So if you ever find one of these old titles tucked away on a dusty VHS shelf, give it a chance. It might be rough around the edges, but it's part of the era that defined what horror would become. Thanks for watching, and remember, always be kind and rewind, because every movie is someone's favorite.